A Mark Brown Arthur chapter book. Arthur and the No-Brainer. Text by Stephen Krensky. Based on a teleplay by Dietrich Smith. For my sister Bonnie, a great kindergarten teacher. Chapter 1. Mr. Ratburn stood in front of his third-grade class, smiling. Relax, everyone. There's no reason to be nervous. His words sounded calm and reasonable, but they made no difference. The look of fear on everyone's face remained unchanged. All eyes were focused on the bunch of straws Mr. Ratburn was holding in his hand. The ends sticking out of the top were all the same length, but on the bottom the hidden end one straw was short. Who will pick the short straw? Mr. Ratburn asked. Whom will Lady Luck smile on today? Will it be you, Francine? He held out his hand toward her. Francine gulped. She squeezed her eyes shut and picked out a straw. It was a long one. Ah, she sighed, smiling with relief. Mr. Ratburn shook his head. May I take this opportunity to remind everyone that this is not some kind of punishment? Arthur and Buster shared a look. That was easy for Mr. Ratburn to say. After all, he wasn't the one doing the picking. Binky was next. Gee, this is a big moment, he said. Maybe I should be better prepared. Choose, please, Binky, said Mr. Ratburn. Being prepared is very important. Binky went on. As you're always telling us. And you know how I take in every word. Binky. Okay. Sheesh. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. He picked, and his was a long straw, too. Sue Ellen and Muffy followed, and their straws were long as well. Please keep the groaning to a minimum, Mr. Ratburn told the remaining class members. It really doesn't have to be this way. We can stop right now if anyone wants to volunteer for the task at hand. Nobody raised a hand. And so Mr. Ratburn continued. As he walked around the room, straw after straw was picked. They were all long ones. Finally, Mr. Ratburn came to Arthur and Buster. I guess it's come down to you two, he said. 2 straws. 2 students. 1 long and 1 short. Are you ready? Arthur didn't look ready. He looked like he would rather be at the dentist having a tooth pulled. Buster looked even worse. 2 teeth at least. Or maybe 3. Don't be shy, boys. Make your move. Both Arthur and Buster were sweating. They were thinking the same thing. Why couldn't somebody else have picked the short straw earlier? Then they could have been sympathetic, patting whomever it was on the back and making supportive remarks. Instead, that was what everyone else was going to do to one of them. Arthur reached out slowly and touched the top of the 2 straws. Back and forth went his fingers, unable to make a decision. Then Buster cracked. He made a sudden lunge and grabbed a straw, the short one. Congratulations, Buster, said Mr. Ratburn, beaming. You win. Win? Buster gasped. You call competing against the brain in a math contest winning? Well, I don't. And then he fell back in his chair like a wet noodle. Chapter 2. Mr. Ratburn stood on the left side of the auditorium stage staring out at the students. To his right, Buster and the Brain stood at podiums, waiting for the questions to begin. The Brain flexed his fingers and then covered his mouth as a yawn tried to escape. Meanwhile, Buster was frantically flipping through joke books. If I can make the crowd laugh, he muttered, maybe it won't matter that I don't know anything. It's just a contest, Buster, said the Brain. If you get a question wrong, it's not the end of the world. How would you know? You never get questions wrong. Maybe it's more like the end of the world than you think. All right, contestants, said Mr. Ratburn, please remove all reference materials so we can begin. Francine stepped forward and took away Buster's joke books. Are we ready for the first question? Mr. Ratburn went on. Go easy, brain, please, Buster whispered. Mr. Ratburn cleared his throat. Define hypotenuse. Buster pressed his buzzer at once. Bzzzzzzzzz. Yes, Buster, said Mr. Ratburn. No. Did I do that? Mr. Ratburn folded his arms. Yes, you did. And you have 5 seconds to answer. Buster smiled awkwardly. Then he started waving madly. Hypotenuse, he shouted. The audience laughed. Mr. Ratburn allowed himself a small smile. Very amusing, Buster, but we're not performing at Jack's joke shop. All right, Brain, would you like to try? The Brain hesitated for a moment. Can I pass? He asked. Mr. Ratburn looked surprised. If you'd like. Hey, what are you doing? Said a voice inside the Brain's head. I know, you're worried about Buster. Well, don't be. He'll be fine. Meanwhile, millions of people will think you don't know what a hypotenuse is. The Brain sighed. Excuse me, Mr. Ratburn. I've changed my mind. A hypotenuse is the side of a trapezoid. I'm sorry, said Mr. Ratburn. That's incorrect. The audience gasped. The Brain was shocked. Wrong? Said the voice in the Brain's head. We're never wrong. While the Brain was busy thinking, he missed Mr. Ratburn's next question. Buster hit his buzzer. Yes, Buster, said Mr. Ratburn. Buster looked excited. I know this one. An octagon has 8 arms, sides. Correct. Buster smiled. Good thing I watched Attack of the Octopus People last night. Next, said Mr. Ratburn. Jack and Phil went to the ice cream parlor. There was a special that day that added 1 free scoop for every 2 scoops you bought. If Jack bought the Leaning Tower 4 Scoop Supreme, how many bzzzzzzzzz? 6, said Buster, licking his lips. Especially if it's the double chocolate almond ripple. Correct, said Mr. Ratburn. But you didn't finish the question, said the Brain. The rules don't say anything about that, Mr. Ratburn explained. If Buster wants to take a chance, that's his option. You, of course, are free to do the same. But I like to hear the whole question in case there are any subtleties. Mr. Ratburn nodded. Then you're taking a chance of a different kind. The Brain looked as if he didn't like the sound of that. Chapter 3. I beat the Brain. Buster shouted at the top of his lungs as he pushed open the school doors at the end of the day. The other kids followed him out to the playground. Way to go, Buster. You were unbelievable. Eating all that ice cream was bound to pay off someday. As Buster went off with the admiring crowd, Arthur, Muffy, and the Brain brought up the rear. Arthur was happy for Buster, of course, but he was concerned about the Brain. The Brain didn't look concerned. He didn't look anything, really. I don't understand, Brain, said Arthur. You've never had any trouble with those kinds of questions before. But once Buster answered that octagon thing, you weren't the same. Buster got hotter and you just, crumbled. You barely got any questions right at all. Crumbled, the brain repeated. Little tiny pieces. Microscopic, smaller than grains of sand, crumbled to the atomic level. Subatomic, even. Very small. Yes, yes, said Arthur. Well, it wasn't that bad. Crumble, mumble, stumble, muttered the brain. They all go together. Have you ever noticed that? Arthur rolled his eyes. Can't say that I have. But that doesn't explain what happened. The brain continued to stare straight ahead. What happened? Too many things have happened since the dawn of time to mention them all in one. Hell 0000, said Muffy. Earth to brain. Come in, brain. Red alert. Why only red? The brain said absently. So many colors to choose from. He wandered away toward the bikes. Houston, we have a problem, said Muffy. Do you think it's safe to leave him alone? Arthur frowned. I'd feel better if he were blinking more. Francine jogged over. She had listened to Buster get more than enough compliments. Don't worry, she said to Arthur and Muffy. I can handle this. Francine approached the brain near the bikes. Hey, brain. Tough break today. But, you know, the world is filled with tough breaks. I mean, if it weren't, we wouldn't know they were tough. All the breaks would just be soft or easy or whatever it is that breaks are when they're not tough. Right? The brain didn't answer. Francine took a deep breath. Anyway, the point is, you can't let tough breaks get to you. You have to fix them or forget them or do something so that they don't get to you. The brain still said nothing. Francine raised her hand and knocked gently on the side of the brain's head. Anybody home in there? Stop it, Francine, said Arthur. I know you're trying to help, but... The brain started to walk away. See you guys later. I have to get home. I think I hear my mother calling me. Francine, Arthur, and Muffy watched him go. Arthur hadn't heard anything. Neither had the others. Gee, said Francine, this is worse than I thought. Chapter 4. That night at dinner, the brain didn't have much of an appetite. He had shaped his mashed potatoes into a pyramid. Historically noteworthy, his father Obi served. But I believe the goal here is to eat them. The brain nodded slowly and scooped up a forkful. You don't seem very hungry, said his mother. Are you feeling okay? Did you have a good day at school? Chimerical, said the brain. His mother exchanged a glance with his father. Then she got up and retrieved a fat dictionary from the counter. They flipped quickly through the pages. The brain's father coughed. And what made your day like a fire-breathing monster with a lion's head and a goat's body? I think he must mean definition number 2, said the brain's mother. Ah. Absurd or impossible. So, what made your day like that? The brain sighed. Lots of things. What would you think of me if I ever got anything wrong? His mother smiled. Well, honey, everybody gets things wrong sometimes. I suppose that's true, said the brain, considering it. The occasional exception only proves the rule. Exactly. So if I got something wrong, you wouldn't be disappointed? His mother smiled. The sun would still come up in the morning, she reminded him. The brain nodded. I guess I was just tired. You're sure you're not coming down with anything? His mother asked. She placed a hand on his forehead. No, no. I don't have that excuse. The brain stood up. Maybe I should go do some homework. Good idea, said his mother. That always perks you up. Up in his bedroom, the brain settled down to read. Some people liked to read stretched out on their beds, but not the brain. He sat at his desk, his notepad ready in case he wanted to write anything down. But he had trouble concentrating. The day's events kept playing themselves over and over in his mind. He was very tired, and his head soon slumped forward. In a hospital room, a doctor was reading a chart on an EEG machine. Mr. Ratburn was assisting. Next to the machine, the brain was lying in bed. IQ at 120 and still falling. 118. 115. What does that mean? Asked the brain's father, who was standing nearby with the brain's mother. I'm afraid his intelligence is in free fall, the doctor explained. It's not life-threatening. He's in no immediate danger, except, of course, the danger of becoming average. The brain's parents gasped. Average? His father repeated. You mean, he will become of ordinary intelligence? The doctor nodded. I'm afraid so. We can work medical miracles today in many areas, but the brain remains the last frontier. He turned to Mr. Ratburn. Want to call it? Mr. Ratburn looked at his watch. 4:53 p.m. The patient was declared average. The brain's head jerked up as he suddenly awoke. Average, he muttered, staring sadly out the window. That's what I am. Clearly, he thought, it is the beginning of the end.